Good morning and welcome to the SB4 Accelerator Lab, a virtual and educational workshop series put on by DCG Strategies and the San Francisco Interfaith Council. A special thanks, this SB4 Accelerator Lab series is supported by a generous grant from the Crankstart Foundation. A bit of housekeeping, today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. For chat, you can submit a question or comment by selecting the chat button at the bottom of your screen and sending a message to Q&A. Questions will be forwarded to the host and answered time permitting. For closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. And at this time, I would like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and our collaborating partner, DCG Strategies, I want to welcome you to this second in a series of 3 virtual educational workshops entitled the SB4 Housing Accelerator Lab, Fast Tracking Affordable Housing on Faithland in San Francisco. This series is funded by a generous grant from the Crankstart Foundation and is designed to empower San Francisco congregations with property to take the next step toward building affordable housing. This second session will build on the foundations laid in our first webinar and take a deeper dive into the critical pre-development phase of affordable housing. This webinar will guide faith-based organizations through the essential steps of assessing their properties for development potential. We'll explore how to conduct feasibility studies, analyze physical, financial, and environmental viability of your site, and identify available grant opportunities. Whether you're just starting to explore development or already have a vision in mind, this session will help clarify what's possible and what to watch out for. We'll also discuss how to ensure your housing project aligns with your mission and creates long-term value for your congregation and surrounding community. Attendees will walk away with insights on how to navigate environmental concerns, evaluate red flags, and assess the social and cultural impact of a proposed development. Finally, it will provide expert guidance and inspiration for your next step toward faith-led housing. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our team and our guest presenter. Representing DCG Strategies is Megan MacIver, Vice President of DCG Strategies, where she leads strategic real estate projects with a focus on faith-based communities. She brings extensive experience from prior roles at JLL, the Signal Group, and CIP Capital, with over $1 billion in commercial real estate transactions. Megan is also a candidate for ordination in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and is pursuing a Master of Divinity degree in Berkeley while leading children's ministry at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in San Francisco. She holds degrees from the University of Chicago and Columbia University. We also really want to welcome our guest presenter today, Diana Downton, Senior Affordable Housing Finance Consultant at Community Economics, Inc., CEI. Diana joined CEI in 2014, bringing with her 14 years of previous experience in affordable housing development, advocacy, and local government housing finance. Prior to joining CEI, she worked for the City of Oakland's Housing and Community Development Department, serving as the lead staff for the city's affordable housing development notice of funding availability process and providing financing for a wide variety of affordable housing, rental, and ownership projects, including new construction and rehabilitation of family, senior, and special needs housing. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Megan, why don't you kick us off and let us know where we're going to go from here?
Thanks, Michael. We're delighted to be part of this initiative. If we could bring the slide deck up now, please, that would be great. We have been partnering with the San Francisco Interfaith Council, as well as with generous support from the Crankstart Foundation. This is the second workshop and a series of workshops that we're putting on, as Michael said, with the intention to supply the information needed for congregations to make informed decisions about moving forward with the development of affordable housing on faith lands. So thank you. Today's workshop will begin with some introductions and a program description to tell you a little bit more about this initiative we're calling the SB4 Accelerator Lab, with the intention that we want to take advantage of this new piece of legislation and really focus our efforts on equipping congregations in the city and county of San Francisco specifically that are ready to take the next step in developing more affordable units of housing on their land. We'll go next to the big picture, a development overview, so we can situate ourselves within the very long and complex process of real estate development and what topics we'll be covering today. We'll then move to a discussion of suitability, which of course includes considerations around physical and congregational suitability for development. Then we'll talk about your professional development team. So with these workshops, our goal is not to create development experts amongst congregations. Rather, it is to understand an overview of the development process with a focus on key relationships that congregations will have with development professionals that will be part of their team. So all of these workshops are really geared toward empowering congregations to have really effective, strong relationships with those development professionals that will be the ones to partner with those congregations to see their vision come into reality. We're very, very honored to have Diana Downton from Community Economics join us. The focus of this session is really how to partner with the financial analyst. So it really just comes down to, can you finance this project? In a lot of ways, that's really the bottom line. And so today we'll focus on understanding how you can figure out whether a project is feasible and what it looks like to partner with a financial analyst. Thank you. So we'll move forward one more slide. I do want to talk about, and one more slide again, thanks, Trey. I do want to talk about this program overall, and there are several components to this program that we are running with generous support from Crankstart. There are several parts to this initiative. Our goal is to empower faith communities to play a leading role in addressing the housing crisis in California, but specifically in the city and county of San Francisco. And we know that that geographic area is one that has really unique development opportunities, but also constraints. And so we want to be aware of those, both from a policy perspective and just the general political landscape that's going to shape what's possible on land in that area. And so really, there are three components to this. The first is, the educational workshops, which we're doing now, and which will be available as recordings on websites later on. We're also taking a look in close partnership with the planning department at all sites in the city and county of San Francisco that are eligible, that qualify for SB4, which means that they are now by right zoned for the construction of 100% affordable housing under this legislation. So DCG Strategies is taking a look at that list of properties and really categorizing them. We're kind of running them through a funnel to identify those congregations that we think have the most potential and the most promise. Separately then, we're also trying to contact all of those congregations, and we're opening up a grant process. And so we'll talk about how you can apply for a grant to receive a preliminary feasibility analysis from DCG Strategies that will include, it's really basically a go or no-go analysis. So we'll take a look at your physical site, we'll provide financial analysis, and that will also include preliminary architectural studies. And the goal there again is to really determine whether your property is well suited for affordable housing development. So thank you. We will circulate this link as well, but I want to let folks know, we can probably put the link in the chat, that it's time to apply for these pre-development feasibility analyses. There is a Google form where you can provide information about your congregation, the size of land available, as well as some of your congregational resources, and a real articulation of why you're feeling called to develop affordable housing. So that deadline is, the deadline to receive applications is August 1st of this year. So we'll circulate that link as well. I just want to take a quick step back and let folks know, maybe who haven't encountered us before, who DCG Strategies is. So we've been in business for 20 years. We say that we speak two languages, so we're really uniquely situated. We are real estate experts. So, Landis Graydon, our CEO and founder, was a planning commissioner. He has decades and decades of commercial real estate development experience. And all of us are real estate people by trade. And we are also people of faith, all of us in senior leadership. And so we know how faith communities make decisions. We know that the rights, unlike private companies, churches don't make decisions based on what's going to make them the most money. There are a lot of I should say congregations don't, there are just a lot of other aspects that come into that, and DCG is sensitive to that, and that's really our calling, to walk with faith communities through that process. So thank you. And I'll just give a really high-level overview of some of the things we offer. We have multiple practice groups within DCG, so we can help lead strategic discernment processes. We provide all types of analysis, planning, and project management. We also provide brokerage services, which include leasing and sales of property and acquisition. So if you're growing and you want to acquire land, we can help you with that. And then ongoing strategic asset management, in particular at the judicatory level. So we help bishops and other folks that oversee regions of congregations to make smart decisions that enable ministries to thrive. And we know the San Francisco Interfaith Council. We've partnered with SFIC on multiple initiatives, and they do such great work to celebrate diverse faiths and spiritual traditions and bring people together to build understanding and serve the community, and of course convene and communicate and advocate for the city's faith-based community and amplify the voice of those communities. I want to briefly say that this is not our first collaboration with SFIC. Last year we had, in 2024, a really generous grant from the San Francisco Foundation to do similar work, and we provided workshops as well as feasibility analyses. And that program was called the Ministry of Housing. And through that program, we were able to train over 120 individual congregations in real estate development fundamentals. So we'll move now to kind of the heart of the presentation this morning, and talk about the big picture. So this is the second in this workshop series. This is the second event. So it's really a continuation of some of the things we talked about last month. Thank you. We'll move forward. And we want to just talk about kind of where does this discussion today fit within the very long and complex timeline of a typical development project. So if we start kind of on the left side of the slide, we're kind of breaking things down, broadly speaking, into several key phases. First is really the discernment, initial feasibility, and conceptualization. So it's at this early stage that the pre-development feasibility grant that I've talked about really comes into play. It's at this stage that congregations want to undertake a go or no-go analysis. I think what we've seen in our work with faith communities is, especially with the advent of SB4, folks are really interested in providing housing on their land. And so that can create kind of chatter and noise in congregation systems. It's really interesting. But we want to make sure that congregations know from a physical real estate perspective whether it's possible or not, so that you can make a decision with a lot of certainty about how to move forward and where to place your limited resources for ministry. And so it's really helpful to know indeed whether your site is well suited for development or not. And so at that early stage of development, you're assessing site suitability, you're clarifying your mission and your call, and you're confirming congregational capacity. Are you called to do this here and now? And part of that, of course, is engaging a consultant to do a preliminary pre-development feasibility analysis at that stage to tell you what's possible on the site. The second stage is really what we like to call team building and stakeholder engagement. So reaching out to your neighborhood, your parish in the historical sense, who are your neighbors? Who do you serve? Who do you love? And what is needed from your congregation, especially with regards to the development of housing. This also informs funding strategy. So does your neighborhood need more housing for vulnerable seniors? Diana is going to talk about different types of funding strategies that can serve different population groups. And that should all come from a really local grassroots appreciation of what's needed from your community here and now. And then also to identify key partnerships. Are there other congregations perhaps around the corner who are doing similar work, and are there ways that you can make one another stronger by partnering and contributing resources? Once you've decided that it is possible to develop affordable housing on your site, there's sort of a second round of more precise, more in-depth diligence that you need to do. And so that's this middle phase here, feasibility study and developer partnership. This study is much more in-depth, and it involves a number of different professionals who take a look at a really high technical degree at your land and really confirm whether development is possible and what type of development is possible. Those studies are typically commissioned through your developer partner. So at this phase, congregations go through a process where they select a developer partner and really enter into a long-term relationship with that developer who will be responsible for turning that vision into reality. Another option that congregations have at this stage is to secure an owner representative. So part of what we like to do at DCG is just make sure that congregations know what resources are available to them as they embark on this journey, and how they can fortify themselves and make sure they're protected and that their vision actually gets executed. And part of that one role that can really help with that is what we call an owner representative or a development consultant. DCG or other companies can play that role, and really that professional organization stands between the congregation and the developer to really help liaise between those two entities and make sure that the priorities of the congregation are reflected in the final development. Then we move on to really design and planning, which is really led by the developer. So architectural design, engineering and environmental and impact studies, we're working with the planning department, and then we move on to construction and operation. So we're really going to be focusing today on the first sort of three stages of this very broad, very high level overview of development. So thank you. I wanted to bring back this slide. We've talked about this before in the last session, but really, whether a decision is, should we lease out our extra education wing to a preschool, something that's kind of small and let's say short term, or should we develop affordable housing? DCG thinks that there's this process that should happen for any congregational real estate decision. And so we always want to anchor these decisions in a discernment process and striving for internal alignment. Part of that are processes that a congregation goes through to tell its story to itself. So who are we as a congregation? What are our core values? What does our community need? What spiritual and organizational resources do we have? And what are our gifts? And what are we called to do here and now? I think a lot of congregations think that they agree on these things, and mostly they do. But what's really fruitful, I've found, is to get folks together, do workshops where the congregation has to articulate that mission to themselves, really clarify that. And also, even if you have a mission and a vision and a value statement on your website, that might change, and that's good, because that's the sign of a thriving, mission-driven organization. And these types of discussions are what's going to provide that really fertile groundwork that's going to shape the development, that's going to be rooted in community needs, and that's going to be sort of right-sized for what your congregation is capable of. The next phase is to uncover real estate needs and resources. So really this is, again, really based with a ministry first needs and resource assessment. Let's think about our ministry. What in the abstract, what do we think our future ministry is going to look like? Do we need educational spaces? Do we need office spaces? Do we need a worship space? And do we need access to that worship space to be on a particular street? So look at your real estate with new eyes and imagine new life. See your place, your sacred places, as if it's for the first time. And then finally, identify your leaders, your partners, and your plan. So I think congregations are great because they have this tradition of kind of going it alone, being really scrappy, trying to figure things out on their own, and everybody kind of helps and makes things happen. And that certainly is part of a successful development. And we want to make sure that with a complex, really specialized operation like real estate development, the right development partners are on your team. Thank you. So we'll move forward to think about suitability and congregational readiness, so physical and congregational. So I've talked about this a little bit, so I'll go quickly. We want to really ask ourselves as a congregation before embarking on this, what are we called to do here and now, and learn from others who perhaps are in your community and have walked this path. You can consider an external facilitator for conversations like these, and sometimes that is helpful. There's certainly a pastor or a religious leader has a certain perspective on the congregation, but a third party who can come in and run a discernment workshop or a planning workshop can help uncover things that perhaps just aren't as evident to folks who are kind of in it every day. So thank you. And I bring this quote from Father Phil Brochard, who successfully, All Souls Episcopal Parish in Berkeley successfully developed many units of affordable housing for seniors on their land. He describes that process and was part of our Ministry of Housing initiative last year. And he says to congregations, the wisdom he and his congregation learned is, believe it deeply and hold it lightly, meaning believe very deeply what you're called to do, but then be open to the possibilities of how that's going to actually incarnate, so to speak, in the actual development, and don't hold too closely to what you think it's going to look like, because something else might come along that might be even better, might be even more appropriate that you just hadn't planned for. So thank you. I'll run through this quickly. Here are the things that we really want to think about when we are assessing the possibility for a development. So there's site constraint analysis, there's land use analysis, and then there's financial analysis. And very shortly, Diana Downton will take over and talk about that financial analysis piece. When we think about site constraint, we want to think about what is physically possible on the site. Are there environmental issues? What constraints are present? Meaning, are there access issues? Are there easements? Are there environmental issues that perhaps brownfield or other seismic concerns? When we think about a land use analysis, that's questions like, what is the zoning or general plan? What are the uses around the congregation? Are they mostly single family homes? Is a tower going to look out of place in such a neighborhood? We want to think about this because this all kind of feeds into feasibility. And what uses are likely to be approved. So that really depends. We work across the state of California, and different planning departments or municipal authorities have different goals, and different abilities to approve development. So, we want to think about what uses are likely to be approved by the bodies that decide those uses. And then financial analysis, I'll pause that just to let Diana get to that in her presentation. So thank you. And finally, we'll just take a look at your professional development team. And again, with this emphasis on relationships, we can just go to the next slide. When a congregation is thinking about entering into a partnership with a professional team, there are a couple questions that DCG suggests that you ask. So, does this team have experience developing property specifically on church land? Congregational land, I should say. What are their successes in this area? Does this team have staying power, a deep bench? So has this firm been around for a while? Do you have confidence that they're not going to get overwhelmed if additional projects come on their plate? The next question, do I trust this person? That's a really subjective question, but, get to know them, spend time with them. Is this team somebody that really gets us? Do you think that your vision is one that they respect, one that they are going to fight for like it's their own? And have they worked on projects that inspire us? So even if it's not necessarily a congregational land project, are there other projects they've done that you say, wow, that really looks like something that that's in harmony with our vision for our project? And also talk to their references and ask, what was it like working with this group, and get some stories from there. So thank you. And finally, just at this phase, we want to focus on a couple of relationships that are key to the development process. I've talked about this role of a development consultant, which is also known as an owner's representative. That firm can provide pre-development feasibility analyses. DCG is one firm that does that. It can provide professional valuations. We can also provide in-depth land use analyses. Then there's also an architect. We last session we were Paul McElwee from HKIT joined us to talk about the role of an architect in shaping and planning the development, and really translating land use and zoning into a buildable project. And finally, the financial analyst, and we'll talk about that this session. That role is to build a pro forma, identify possible sources of funding, and really answer the question, does this project pencil? Can it be built? And with that, I'll turn it over to Diana Downton and allow Diana to introduce herself. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Again, I'm Diana Downton with Community Economics, also known as CEI. I'm a senior affordable housing consultant, and CEI has been around for over 40 years, providing support to nonprofit developers, community organizations, and local governments to develop affordable housing, and in particular to put together the financing necessary to develop that housing. So I spend most of my time looking at projects as big Excel spreadsheets, which I enjoy because it's kind of like a puzzle. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Community Economics also provides technical assistance, and we do advocacy as well toward affordable housing financing and development. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So Megan mentioned these two topics for financial feasibility. Are there financial resources available, and will the property cash flow to sustain operations? So these are the two main focuses that the financial analyst will be assisting you with, as well as just navigating this whole complicated system that we have for financing affordable housing, which, we wish it was simpler, but unfortunately it's quite complicated, requiring attorneys, financial consultants, and all these various parties that end up joining your development team if you move forward. So what does your financial consultant help you with? Primarily, we will set up what's called a financial pro forma, and essentially that's a model that allows you to look at different possible scenarios and evaluate how it works from a financial perspective. And it typically uses the assumptions that others in the financing world are using. So investors, lenders, there's kind of a standard underwriting that your financing partners will be using. So when we set up our pro forma, we use those assumptions. because eventually you'll be bringing in all these financial partners who will also need to understand your financial model. So there's, again, the kind of two primary components to the financial model. The first is, how are you going to build the building? Likely it's going to be a layer cake, as people sometimes call it, of different financing sources that you're bringing together over a period of time to build the development. And then we have to make sure that, of course, this is an affordable housing project, the rents are low, so we have to make sure that the building can operate, can pay its expenses, its operating expenses over time, because once the building's in operations, you're paying your property management staff, you're paying janitorial staff, you're paying utilities, insurance, all those things. So you have to cover those. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So what we often want to start with is just the framing of the project. The vision is really important, of course. As Megan already touched on, what's your passion here? Who do you want to serve? What's the greatest need? What income level are you interested in targeting? And so you start with this vision, but again, as Megan also pointed out, you hold it lightly, because as you go through this process of the feasibility analysis, as well as evaluating the potential financing sources that are available, you may need to shift your vision a bit. But it's good to start with your vision. So then what your financial analyst can help you with is determining if your vision is realistic. So if you come in saying, I want to serve 100%, households who have been homeless or are experiencing homelessness in some way, or are special needs, that could be challenging because those tenants are going to be able to pay a very low rent and that won't cover your operating expenses. So the financial analyst can help you determine whether your vision is realistic, and if not, kind of help come up with a vision that is more realistic. Also, one thing that we'll look at in framing the project is, are there any subsidies, any ongoing rental or operating subsidies that we could use to help you target the population you want to target? So if you want to target units to formerly homeless households, are there some kind of operating subsidies that we can bring to the table? So Section 8 project-based vouchers is a great rental subsidy that's sometimes available. And also in San Francisco specifically, there's the local operating subsidy program, also known as LOSP, which is specifically for formerly homeless households. And it pays kind of the tenants paying very minimal rent, and then that subsidy covers the cost to operate that unit, whatever that is for that building. That subsidy comes in to cover that operating deficit. So those are a couple examples of other sources you might use for operations. Then after we've done this exercise of figuring out, okay, who do you want to target? What income levels? Is there any operating subsidy, rental subsidy? And we look at your potential operating expenses. How much will it cost to operate the building every year? Then we look at, okay, after all that, is there any revenue left over that might be able to pay a mortgage? This is a loan that the property could get to help fund the development side, and that would be repaid over time, just like a regular mortgage. So that's kind of the first piece of the exercise, is looking at operations and framing the project. And we can go to the next slide. So then we continue on with what we might call a gap analysis. So what's your financing gap? So if you were, developing a market rate project with high rents, You might be able to, those high rents might be able to support a really large mortgage that will help finance the development of the building, but this is affordable housing. So you're not going to have a large permanent mortgage or maybe any permanent mortgage. So then we start this process of determining what your other sources might be. So one of the major sources that is available for affordable housing development is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. CEI, one of the reasons why many people work with us, many developers work with us, is that we have a particular expertise in the tax credit program. It is quite complicated. And so, gets into IRS rules and things like that. So it's helpful to have a financial analyst to help you navigate that program. The way the tax credit program works is that the credits are delivered over a 10-year period, but you find an investor because, the developer is typically a nonprofit, and tax credits, you don't pay tax. So why do you need tax credits? So you sell those tax credits essentially to an investor partner who will become part of the ownership entity for the project, and they will be receiving those tax credits over a 10-year period. But they put in the money at the point of development upfront to help you build the project, and then they're your partner over the period, the tax credit compliance period, and they receive those credits over time. So that's kind of the next source that we might look at. How much tax credits could you potentially leverage? And that your financial analyst can help you figure that out. Then the next, likely the tax credits aren't sufficient to cover your entire capital budget, the budget to build the building. So we start looking at other possible sources. So the city of San Francisco, since this is a San Francisco focus group, will potentially have resources. Sometimes they have more, sometimes they have less. Many of them are supported by local ballot initiatives. So keep supporting those local affordable housing initiatives that raise the financing needed. So it's good to work with a developer that, if you're partnering with a developer, choose one that has good relationships with the city because they are a key financing partner. Another source that is often used is our sources from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. They have an alphabet soup of different programs, MHP, the Multifamily Housing Program, IIG, Infill Infrastructure Grant. There's all kinds of programs that they have. Unfortunately, I will say that many of those programs right now are severely underfunded. They were funded by bonds that were passed quite a few years ago and have now been exhausted. So we are very much hoping that there will be a state housing bond on the ballot in 2026 to infuse some more money into those programs. Then one other thing that's important to understand in this process of putting together the financing is that some of these sources that I've been talking about, they're not available until the building is complete. So you will apply for those sources, you'll be awarded those sources, and then you will, but you won't get those funds until the building is entirely constructed. So you need money to build the building, so therefore you have to get a construction loan from a conventional bank. So a Wells Fargo or a US bank, just a bank. And you'll have to pay interest on that, which you'll include in your development budget. So all the sources are competitive and in short supply. So many projects have to apply over and over and over again for sources. Also, each program has its own, scoring and ranking criteria. So part of the financial feasibility process is looking at your specific project and thinking about whether it will compete well for those sources. Of course, sometimes those sources change their scoring criteria, but you do the best you can to try to determine if this project will be competitive for those sources. And that's another way where working with a financial consultant can be really useful, because we apply for these sources all the time. So we're very accustomed to what the scoring and ranking criteria are. Actually, one thing that I didn't really mention is the other thing as part of the gap analysis is just determining your cost. So we have to have some idea of what it will cost to build the project. Your financial analyst is generally not a cost estimator, so we can't necessarily tell you how much it's going to cost to build the building, or how much your architecture or insurance costs are going to be. So that's where having an owner's representative, as Megan mentioned, or having partnered, once you're partnered with a developer, they'll have information from other projects and such that you can come up with a development budget. So generally, you'll just provide most of the development budget information to the financial analyst, who will then, kind of run the whole pro forma based on those development costs, and come up with a suggestion of how to put together the financing layer cake for your project. Let's continue. So what this is here is an example of a financing stack. This is a little bit of the layer cake here in some different colors. To give an example of a specific project that I'm working on right now that's in the city of Berkeley. So this project, we're just applying for tax credits now. Not sure if we're going to get them in this round. We'll probably have to reapply. But this is what the financing is looking like at the moment for this project. It's a partnership with a church in the city of Berkeley and a nonprofit developer. So the first column on the left is the construction period sources. So that top portion that's all purple is the construction loan. So during construction, there's this large construction loan from a bank. And then the tax credit equity is that blue amount, the light blue. The tax credit investor will put in maybe a small amount of their funding during construction. And then in this project, there's that orange line, which in this case was a contribution from the church. So for this project, the church land being used to build the housing is a surface level parking lot, and they wanted to have that parking replaced with some structured parking spaces in the housing building. So they're getting paid some money for their land. There'll be a long-term ground lease in this case. They're being paid up front for the value of the ground lease, and then they're putting in some money back to have the replacement parking built. Structured parking is pretty expensive, just by the way. They're putting in some money for that. And then this project also received a large allocation from the city of Berkeley, so that's coming in during the construction period. Then the next column is the permanent period. This project has some Section 8 project-based vouchers. That means those Section 8 vouchers are committed to that property for at least 20 years. So that allows the project to support a permanent mortgage of about $6 million. Then the next chunk, the light blue, is the tax credit equity. The investors purchasing those tax credits that you've been allocated for the tax credits. Those are federal tax credits, but you apply to the state tax credit allocation committee for those tax credits. The investor will purchase those tax credits, and they're putting in $27 million at the permanent conversion after the building is complete. Then this project received $18.7 million from the state of California from the multifamily housing program. That's a very competitive source, so we were happy that this project was successful. Then again, the church has already contributed some money. The city of Berkeley contributed their money, and this is a beautiful, complete financing stack to complete the project. And I'm not going into the operations here, but in terms of the operations, the property targets a range of income levels, some formerly homeless households. This is a senior project as well. I think I didn't mention that. And up to, I think, like 50% of the area median income in terms of income levels. So it's kind of a range of affordability levels. And then the Section 8 comes in and pays a higher rent for the homeless targeted households to help support operations. Okay, next slide. So other considerations that may be more specific to a partnership with a faith community. I think it's good for, you know, many of the projects that I'm involved in that involve a community organization and a developer, a faith community and a nonprofit developer. The faith community may have their own goals in addition to just developing the affordable housing, which is a totally worthy goal unto itself and maybe all you're interested in, but it's possible that you might have other goals. So for example, in the project I discussed, the church wanted to have the parking integrated into the development. Another one I'm working on, the congregation wants to have a community space for the church use, as well as some parking and offices, because they're having kind of another building demolished as part of the development of the housing. So I think it's great to, and you might have other ideas. You might want to have a community, kitchen that serves homeless or homeless households or people in need in your community. So I think it's great to get a little creative about that. Remember, there will be cost to that. So it might make the feasibility more difficult if you're adding components to the project that might make it more expensive. And the affordable housing resources generally can't be used to cover the non-affordable housing component of the project. So, we may need to get a little bit more creative in how we finance those types of goals. And then I think it's great just to say that, the faith community involved in the project can just bring a lot to the table. Of course, you have, the land is a key component. Being kind of a patient partner with your land is very valuable. Maybe you can donate, hopefully you can donate the land, which is essentially helping to subsidize the affordable housing. And that is an incredible benefit. Also, community support, maybe you can even do some fundraising, especially if you have some particular element that you want to develop as part of the project. But I will say that a lot of the housing programs do have some complex rules that might limit what you want to do. So sometimes I'm in the unfortunate position of having to tell people that their really cool, creative idea just isn't going to work. So that's another reason to have a financial partner involved to help you just make sure that your idea is possible. And then the last point I want to make is that advocacy for affordable housing funding is really critical. It always is, but right now it's particularly critical. So even if you decide not to go down the path of developing on your particular portion of land, I really think it's still so worthwhile just to be involved and engaged and continue to advocate on the state level, at the local level, for financing to build these projects, because we really have to have subsidies to build them. Otherwise, this would be market rate housing. So we need resources to develop this housing. It is long-term affordable housing. It will be affordable for many, many decades. So it's an upfront cost, but it'll have long rewards for the community. So I think those were all the main points that I wanted to make. So I guess we can see if there are questions, or if Michael, you want to run some questions by us?
Great.
Or Megan, maybe you want to jump in?
Thank you so much, Diana, for that, for sharing your expertise. Just prior to getting into the Q&A, I wanted to say two quick things. First, I want to emphasize again, and you can find the link in the chat. It will also be emailed afterward. Please apply for a pre-development feasibility analysis if you are a congregation in the city and county of San Francisco, and you're ready to take the next step. The deadline for that is August 1st. It's a really quick application, and feel free to reach out to us as well at DCG if you have any questions. We'll go to the next slide, which is a reminder that our third and final workshop will be taking place next month, Thursday morning, again at 8:30, July 17th. This will be led by Carly Grove, who's the principal planner in the city and county of San Francisco, and this will focus specifically on the relationship that a congregation has to planning, and some of the resources and legislation that is really specific to the development context of San Francisco. And at this point, I will turn it over to Michael Pappas, and we'll move into some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you so much, Diana. We do have a few questions, and we would encourage our attendees, if they haven't already, they are welcome and encouraged to offer some in the chat to Q&A so that we can get your questions answered. To begin with, how early and at what stage in the process should a financial analyst be brought into church congregation-led housing projects?
Well, I would say that you will need, I guess I would say first, after you've evaluated your site and determined that it is workable, I think that's kind of the first step. And then really a step you need to take right away too is determining the financial feasibility. So I think it's good to have a financial analyst look at it pretty early. I would say that, sometimes probably you don't always need someone like me. You might be able to have your owner's rep, or if you've already partnered with a developer, they can usually have a capacity to run some preliminary numbers. But to have someone who understands affordable housing finance running some numbers early on can be really helpful. And maybe you have that initial financial feasibility, and then maybe you don't run it again for a little while, but just as kind of an initial evaluation, I think it's important to do early on.
Thank you for lifting up the importance of the owner rep, because our relationship with DCG Strategies started back in 2016 or 2017, when a parade of finance and developer folks came in front of us. And what we saw is the only thing a lot of them had in common was none of them had the best interest of the congregations in common. It was going to be a field day. And so when the president of the University of San Francisco introduced us to Landis and DCG Strategies, we all kind of breathed a sigh of relief, because we're trying to support congregations who want to repurpose their property, but we don't want to see them get taken advantage of. So I think that this relationship with the owner rep is really important. Something we're hearing, from and Megan, you can back me up or not, is a lot of the congregations, they've been there for 100, 150 years, and they'd like to retain ownership of the property, and in doing so, they'll have to have long-term leases. How does that impact financing?
So I would say quite a few projects do have long-term ground leases. It's something that a lot of lenders and investors have become comfortable with. Attorneys know how to draft the ground leases so that your financing partners will be comfortable with that. I will say in San Francisco, I actually haven't worked on a faith community partnership project in San Francisco. San Francisco, they typically want to own the land themselves, the city. So I'm not entirely sure how that would play out because of that specific situation in San Francisco, that the city wants to own the land for the same reason that, that maybe the church might. They want to have long-term control. That isn't the case in most jurisdictions. So there's a little bit of a nuance there.
And in saying that, you're saying to be eligible for public monies.
Yes. So if you want to really have any involvement from the city of San Francisco financially, and usually you will need their money to develop your project, then they want to own the land. I don't know if they make exceptions to that, though. So it's possible that you might be able to work with them on that.
We'll ask them point blank. How's that? Megan, did you want to add anything to that? I know that this was a different question.
I think we have seen, and maybe not necessarily for the 100% affordable projects, which is what SB4 is specifically about, but there are a variety of ownership structures that we hope that congregations are aware of. The message I kind of want to send to congregations is that you really have maybe more control than you think within the shape that the project is going to take, and that's why those initial sort of stock taking and real estate kind of inventories are so important. So we want to start with a really kind of abstracted but very clear sense of what the congregation wants its presence to be on that site for the next foreseeable future. Do you need a worship space? How big should it be? Where does the window go? Be really specific about that, and then you'll be in a much more solid position as a group to come to the relationship with the developer. There are condominium structures where the congregation can own, a condo interest in the future development. The one thing I will say is a lot of congregations come to us and say, well, that's great. Let's develop affordable housing, and we're going to give like half of the units to our congregation, and the pastor can have his, parish house. And of course, with fair housing laws, that's not how this works. And so we need to just be aware that, the church will be able to shape some aspects of the development, but when you develop, especially 100% affordable housing, this is an offering that you're giving to the entire community, and it's not something that you're going to be able to earmark for folks in your congregation.
An important point. Yeah. I know that we're coming up on the hour, but I did want to ask, what are the top 2 or 3 financial indicators that tell you whether a project is viable or not?
Yeah, I mean, the site has a lot to do with it. So partly because, the number of units that you can build on your site is important. So if I hear many developers say that they really don't want to do building less than 50 units, because there's just economies of scale. When you're doing a development, there's some fixed costs. So if you're only doing 20 units or something, it tends to be difficult to finance those. So the size of your site, how many units you can fit on it, that will impact also the cost. If you have a really difficult to access site, or a site that's on a big steep hill or has big environmental concerns, all those things are going to impact cost. Another thing that's important about the site is the location near to site amenities, because many of the financing sources are scored based on how close the site is to high quality transit or grocery stores or pharmacies, or so you need to make sure that the site is well located. So that's kind of some basics. Also, just in terms of financial feasibility, making sure that you have a site that is likely to get support from the community, which also means that it's going to get support from potentially from the city, especially in San Francisco. I think the city is you really have to have them on board with your plan. That is going to go a long way to making sure that the project is successful, especially in San Francisco.
Can I indulge you both for a couple more questions? Would that be okay? I know we're coming to the end of the hour. What happens if there are cost overruns and the project costs more, but you've only committed to such certain financing? How do you consult a congregation on something like that?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on when those cost overruns happen, but generally, every budget will have contingencies built into it. Any lender or investor is going to require you have some fairly substantial contingencies in your budget. And you should want those contingencies yourself as well. There's also typically a development budget will include developer fee. So the developer fee is basically the money that the developer receives for their work on the project, as well as for their risk that they take on by undergoing this enormous development project. But the issue with taking on that risk is your developer fee is potentially at risk. So if you might start out with a $2.5 million developer fee that the development entity could be paid. If there's cost overruns, you may have to give up some of your developer fee, or they call it, deferring the developer fee, so it can be paid over time from cash flow from the property rather than paid up front. So the developer fee is at risk. And then there is, in fact, the possibility that the project could have even higher cost overruns. And this is why often the investors or really always the investors and the lenders will be evaluating the development entity and the sponsor of the project to make sure that you have sufficient financial capacity. So when you're deciding who to partner with as a developer, you should keep in mind that they do need to have sufficient financial capacity to be acceptable to the investors and lenders who will be your financial partners.
I don't know if this is a related question or not, but I was listening to you very carefully, and the word subsidy came up. And if we could drill down just a little bit, what role does subsidy or public funding play in making faith-based housing projects feasible?
Well, I mean, I would say that it's probably not particularly different for a faith-based housing partnership development as for any affordable housing development. Really, because it's affordable housing, it really needs some kind of subsidy to make it affordable. There's also kind of the two sides of subsidy. There's the development side subsidies and the operations side subsidies. I really don't see a difference necessarily, though, with faith-based versus not. But I don't know, Megan, I don't know if you have other ideas on that. But.
I would agree, but Diana, it's kind of agnostic, faith or non-faith.
Mm-hmm. And one last question. How do market rate versus affordable housing goals impact the financial structure of a development project?
Mm-hmm. So, I actually don't develop market rate housing, so I'm not really an expert in that. But I will say that, market rate housing essentially relies on the fact that the rents are going to cover the expenses of the building over time, and that you're going to be able to have a bunch of cash flow left over that you support a huge permanent loan that will help fund your development. And probably there's enough left over for you to have equity investors who are going to be getting a rate of return from the building. So it's financed really completely differently. You don't need that subsidy to build the building or to operate it over time. But then you may have more operating risk over time, even though with a market rate development, because you're you could be potentially impacted more by fluctuations in the market if you've planned on a certain rent level and that doesn't materialize. Whereas with affordable housing, you're kind of locked in and you kind of know you're going to be able to find tenants for your units because they're high in demand.
I do remember when Prop A, many, many moons ago, was floated by the city. It was a general obligation bond, and communities of faith applied. I remember one particular award that was given. There was a stipulation, though, that a third of the residents in this senior facility had to be homeless in transition. Megan, this created a community relations problem, and I was just wondering. I know part of the work of DCG is, in addition to making sure the congregation is mission aligned, also in communicating with the neighbors. And I'm wondering if you might just kind of take us into the neighborhood and how DCG would approach, because in order to get that public funding, they needed to satisfy that stipulation, but that needed to be communicated and get neighborhood buy-in. And in that instance, it didn't work out so well.
Yeah, I think I keep kind of beating this drum, but I think that the real key to the success of any development project is that early, thorough discernment process that we talked about, that's not only within the congregation, but kind of reaches out into the community and really takes the time to understand, what populations need help and how do they need to be helped, and understands really deeply the community dynamics that are at play. I think an affordable housing project like the one that also is created in the middle of a very affluent neighborhood in Berkeley, there was a lot of pushback there from folks who live nearby, and they said, well, we don't want these people living here. And also responded and said, well, guess what? They already do live here. They're just living on the streets versus in, so there are ways, I think, to structure that communication to make sure that there are public forums, public spaces where neighbors can, voice those concerns or hopes, and then I think be met with a conversation partner in the form of an organized, coherent congregation that has really thought about, really kind of investigated these possible critiques from the neighborhood because they deeply know the neighborhood. So I think affordable housing projects take a long time, and that can sometimes be frustrating, but it's also really a gift in that there's a lot of space for local communities to really get to know the neighborhood, and but also really understand, what is going to be asked of that congregation in terms of transforming their sense of who belongs and who doesn't. And I think that requires a congregational perspective, both, spiritually, theologically, in every way, that's oriented toward neighbor, that's prioritizes hospitality. And I think that that's kind of a congregational life orientation that needs to be in place. And I think really congregations need to be honest with themselves about whether that's there or not. And there are lots of other ways that congregations can help, but for a project like this that requires sustained congregational input and affection for that community, it's a real that inventory process and a real searching and a real discernment is really foundational to the success of any project.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to these questions, because I know that they're on the minds of those who are contemplating a development on their properties. And I want to thank the both of you for just a comprehensive, articulate, and very helpful presentations. We will be, as Megan mentioned, meeting back for the third in the series on July 17th. And you will be receiving, as will the 5,600 or so e-subscribers, the recording link with real helpful other resource links in that email. So please take a look at it, share it with your real estate teams in your congregations. And finally, just to amplify what Megan said earlier, we encourage congregations that are looking to repurpose their property for affordable housing to apply for the grant. I know there's a deadline of August 1st, I believe it is, Megan, before considerations are made. So there's still time. Just click the link and have a blessed day. Thank you.